let's get going here. So welcome to the third in our series, our Facebook series. This is Connecticut Resources Guiding Transition Planning. My name is Beth Reel, and I am the transition coordinator for the Connecticut Parent Advocacy Center. I am also the Connecticut Youth Advisory Board coordinator, and but today I'm wearing the hat mostly of the transition coordinator. So let's see if we can get the computer to move on to the next slide. Okay. So I always include this this quote at the beginning of my presentations, because even though this is not a Connecticut resource, obviously, as you can see at the top, this is from the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act, but it's the purpose of the law. It's the purpose of having special education. So this is not just for students who are old enough to receive transition planning, but this is for all students. So the point of what we're doing is the bold part at the bottom where it says to prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. So this is the reason why we are doing what we're doing. And I just always want to frame everything that we do in transition around the purpose of the law, the purpose of IDEA. It's a quote that I often send with parents to meetings when we've perhaps lost sight of why we are meeting. So it's just something that I like to start off and frame all of my transition presentations, all CPAC's transition presentations with. So tonight we're going to talk about 4 resources that guide transition planning in Connecticut. So these are resources that are specific to Connecticut. There are others that we use, but these are the top 4. So this is why we chose to share information about the following. And so I'm going to show each one to you as we go through. So the first one I want to start with this evening is called the Transition Bill of Rights. And so I'll switch to the document in a minute, but it is for families and students receiving special education. At one time we had talked about creating a more student-friendly version in Connecticut, and I know that that is still on the to-do list for many of us who work in the area of transition planning. But for now, this is what we have. So this informs families and students about their rights related to education and transition to adult life. So if you were on the first webinar, Transition and the Law, we went actually through a lot of the rights around transition planning. And so the Transition Bill of Rights is a good supporting document for that webinar, or vice versa, I guess. That webinar is a good supporting document for the Transition Bill of Rights. And then the districts are supposed to provide a copy of the Transition Bill of Rights for families and students annually. So typically when the procedural safeguards are handed out at a PPT meeting, hopefully the Transition Bill of Rights is being handed out as well. There is a place on the IEP where the district is supposed to indicate if they handed out the Bill of Rights. And so, so hopefully they're doing that. I'm just realizing that I'm covering the captioning. And then also this document is available electronically and at the website right here at the bottom of the slide, and it's available in English and Spanish. And so let's take a look at, I have to find what window I put it under, the Transition Bill of Rights. Okay, bear with me here. I want to make sure we can see both the captioning and the Transition Bill of Rights. Okay. My technical skills are being challenged here. Sorry, again. Okay. There we go. Okay, so hoping you can all see this because my Zoom controls seem to now have disappeared. Okay, I think we are back working again. Sorry about that. I thought this might be a little bit of a challenge, but okay. So this is the a copy of the Transition Bill of Rights on the CPAC website. It's also available on the State Department of Education website, and the link to that website is on the last slide of this presentation, and I will send that out to you with a link to a recording of the webinar. So what I like to point out is this was created in 2015, and the reason we created it is because there was a what was called a legislative investigations committee concerning transition services for students with autism. And what came out of this, it was a study, really. They interviewed many people that were involved with transition planning for students with autism. And one of the things that came out of it was mandating more information be shared with families with students with autism. And so our State Department went ahead and started creating some documents to support families and students around transition. And so this was the first. So this was created in 2015. It was actually released in 2016, right at the beginning of 2016. And so you'll see that starting in grade 6, families are supposed to receive this, as I mentioned in at the beginning of the slide. And then as we look through, you'll notice that there are many points, and this, the first page has a lot to do with the IEP. So it actually almost walks through the IEP. So talking about transition planning, starting at least age 16 or younger. Actually, that part needs to be updated now with the new autism legislation that I also talk about in the law webinar. And then possibly receiving services until the age of 21 or until graduation, the PPT meetings, the IEPs, the post-school outcome goal statement. Again, all of these things we talk about in the webinar. The Connecticut Core Transition Skills is actually the next document that we're going to talk about. So, but I just wanted to point that out to you, that that is contained in this document as well. There's some information about state agencies, so giving that information to families, transfer of rights, which is also in the transition and the law webinar. And then the second page talks about consideration for transition only services. And so this is probably the area that I refer families to the most, because often families are calling and saying, you know, I know that sometimes students can stay on after they complete their senior year, and why does that happen? How does that happen? When is that appropriate for my student? So we talk about all of these steps, all of these points. They're not really steps, but all of these points to consider for considering a student for transition only services between the ages of 18 and 21. So that's, like I said, probably we refer to this section the most in transition planning. And then they talk a little bit about student success plans, which haven't really taken off so much in Connecticut the way that they're intended to, but we do have some people at the State Department now that are looking at student success plans again. And so this is another piece that will become important, I believe, in the future. And then some of the resources that are available. So, so that is the Transition Bill of Rights. It does need to be updated because it has contact information for the previous transition person at the State Department of Education. But for now, this is what we have. If you have questions as we go along, you're welcome to put them into the chat box or put them into questions, and I'll open it up at the end. I can read questions, or I can put people on live. So the second document that we are going to look at this evening is the Connecticut Core Transition Skills. And this is what's called a list of transition standards. And so we don't really have a formal document anywhere that says this is the law and these are the skills that students need to obtain before they exit school, before they transition out into the adult world. But out of that legislation back in 2015, this Core Transition Skills was created because people were asking constantly, what do we need to work on? What do kids need to work on? What should they know before leaving? And so the State Department and the transition person at the time, Dr. Patricia Anderson, thought it would be a good idea for the Connecticut Transition Task Force to work on a set of standards. And so this came out of a team at the task force working together from a variety of different agencies. And as you'll see, so the first page is a description page. It talks about the fact that it is a list of standards and that the Connecticut State Department of Education proposes that these transition standards should be addressed for all students with an IEP, at least for students ages 15 to 21, and preferably for younger students. So the reason, this is probably the document that I refer parents to most often, because when they're calling me and saying, or they're calling CPAC and saying, okay, so my son or daughter is going to be graduating, but I'm not sure that they're prepared, we first go to this document. We talk about the goals and objectives in the IEP. Do they reflect the needs of the student? And, you know, there's a lot of information out there about what students need to do. There's a lot of checklists. There's a lot of written documentation. There's no shortage on the internet. If you search transition, you know, secondary transition skills or skills for students with disabilities, you will get hundreds, if not thousands, of documents that say, you know, students need to be able to do whatever it may be. And as a parent myself and working with parents over the last, I think I've been at CPAC for 18 years, 17 years, something like that, I lose track. It's really overwhelming. All of these lists and books and checklists and, you know, students should do this and students should do that. Everybody has an idea about what a student should do. This can be much simpler and more straightforward. And even though we know that there are many things within each of the 16 core transition skills that a student may need to work on and develop, this gives us some really basic ways of just saying, okay, so what, you know, are we touching on all of the areas that we need to touch on with this student? So you can see as we go through and look at the actual core transition skills, it says that to the maximum extent possible, each student with a disability will be able to, and it has a colon and then it lists all of the core transition skills. And I just want to point out, it says to the maximum extent possible. And so those of us that work with a variety of students, those of us that work with students know that there is quite a range of students and their abilities and you know, how much they will be able to do and how much they will be able to take on. And so when you're looking at these skills, often, you know, parents will say, well, my son or daughter will never be able to do some of these things. And my question is always, what can they do? How much of this can they do? So, so very first, explaining his or her disability and individual strengths, needs, preferences, and interests. These are things that we need to look at very important skills when you think about employment, when you think about post-secondary education, critical skills, really. We talk about self-determination, we talk about self-esteem, social emotional awareness, assisting in developing the IEP. And so many times when we're talking about students that are transitioning, we're creating those goals and objectives, and the student really needs to have input. We meaning the adults are creating the goals and objectives, and the students really need to have input into their IEP. They need to understand that if they have an IEP document, if that's appropriate for them. Participating in perhaps facilitating his or her planning and placement team meeting. And we're going to talk a little bit later about a document that actually has some exercises in it around helping a student facilitate their or being involved as much as possible in their PPT meeting. Looking at leadership skills and affecting positive social change. You know, understanding that they are citizens, that they have opinions, and that they have a voice, and that it matters and it impacts others the way they share those opinions and that voice. Understanding the law, understanding the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or 504, if they're on a 504, and then the Americans with Disabilities Act as they transition out into the world. And again, there are a couple of places that I'll show you in the documents a little bit later that talk about that. Acting responsible for independence and activities of daily living to the greatest extent possible. Looking at social skills and meaningful relationships. Accessing appropriate physical and mental health care. Often students leave school in transition without having an understanding of where do I receive my my counseling services, for example. So maybe a student sees the school psychologist or the school social worker on a regular basis, and continuing that support is really important. So looking at physical and mental health care. If they were hearing aids, do they know how to change the batteries? Do they know where to buy the batteries? Do they know where to get their medication from? Do they know how to take their medication? All things that students need to know. And then accessing the community resources, it's similar and different to what we just discussed. Post-secondary education and training, looking at the skills necessary, and that doesn't necessarily just mean college or university. That could be many different kinds of lifelong learning skills. So what are the skills that a student would need for that? Skills around employment, you know, these are the two that we see the most in IEPs, right? Post-secondary education and employment. But we really need to consider all of the other areas. Accommodations necessary for post-secondary education and employment. Transportation is a big one in Connecticut. We have many, many challenges with transportation. Uber and Lyft are really helping with this piece in a significant way for the students that we work with. So that's exciting. But you know, how do you safely take an Uber or a Lyft? And is that even appropriate for a student? And then technology, one of the areas that we often forget about, or you know, one of the areas that we have not really developed supports for students in school so that they can access the high level of technology that we have available to us now. So we all, not we all, but many of us carry around smartphones. And so the technology available at our fingertips with a smartphone is absolutely amazing. Every day that I read a story about technology, I'm so surprised, and it's really amazing what we can do. And I could go on about that, but that's not our focus for this week. So that is the Connecticut Core Transition Skills. And like I said, this is the document that I use absolutely the most with families. We talk about all of these things. We talk about what's appropriate for their student. And we talk about how to use this document to go to the school and say, you know, I think we're doing a really good job in some of these areas, and I think we need to look at some other areas and perhaps write some IEP goals and objectives. So that is the core transition skills. I'm not going to switch back to the PowerPoint because I had so much trouble switching over, but the PowerPoint does have the link. It is available on CPAC's website. And actually, I sent that link out to everybody who was registered. For those watching on Facebook, I'll put those links in the comments after the webinar is over so that you can access all of these documents on the CPAC website. So the next document that we are going to look at is called Building a Bridge. And it's a resource manual for high school students. And it was created, actually it was created many, many years ago. I don't even remember off the top of my head now what year the first one was created. But this one was a 2009 revision. So I do want to say that Building a Bridge has been revised, and it is currently at the State Department of Education, going through their process so that it can be released and shared with families, but I don't know exactly when that is going to happen. And we started that process quite a while ago. So I don't want to not share Building a Bridge because I do think it's still a good document, though outdated. But know that hopefully, I'm crossing my fingers that Building a Bridge will be available by the end of this school year, sometime in 2020. The nice part about the new document is it will be broken down into chapters. It won't be in this format. It will still be printable, but it will be broken down into chapters. It will be accessible to screen readers, and it will have live links. It will be somewhat interactive, and it will be available on the State Department's website when it is available. One thing I just wanted to say also about the core transition skills that I'm not sure that I said was that it is available in English and Spanish, as is Building a Bridge. Building a Bridge has been translated into Spanish as well. When the new version is up on the State Department website, it actually will be, they have a translating tool on their website, and you will be able to choose from many different languages. So this is a rather large document. It's 92 pages. And just a couple of things that I want. This is also created by the Transition Task Force. And the couple of pages that I want to show you, I'm sorry if I'm making you dizzy scrolling through this so quickly. So it contains a lot of information for families and students. I can tell you that one of the ways I really like working with this document is encouraging families to work through it with students together. And the reason why is you really, especially when you start working through some of the checklists and skills with a student, it helps you to have conversations that you might not have as a parent otherwise. And so these are really basic assessments that families can do, schools can do. Schools certainly do use this. And, you know, again, they're a little bit smaller. They're not as overwhelming as some of the checklists that I've seen as a parent. And this is just really simple. You know, what are the three, put a check next to all the things that you do well. So everybody can do something well. So, again, looking at those positive things, and then put a circle around the things that you do the best. So really, really simple, straightforward way to look at positive attributes, and, not, instead of looking at what can't you do, what does your student need to work on, then you're looking at a list, framing it with, okay, what are all the things that they can't do, again, which can be upsetting and overwhelming. So, so these are looking at things that students can do. So, same ideas as you go through, likes and dislikes. So there are some, things that a student might not like to do. Like I remember a student that I worked with that just did not like being outside, didn't like working outside, didn't like the heat. So working for a landscaping company, for example, or raking leaves would not be something that that student would want to do for a job. So looking at some social skills, so these assessments and checklists are all still pretty good. They're, again, very basic pen and paper type checklists, but they're simple and they're, it's very good information. Learning to self-advocate, again, some of these links are probably pretty outdated. I know that that one is, but it will give good basic information. Students' rights and responsibilities. So, things that go along with the core transition skills, and also the transition bill of rights. And then, many, I'm going to go through kind of quick, just in the interest of time, but we talk about person-centered planning, we talk about developing the IEP, we talk about PPT meetings, assistive technology. I have to kind of chuckle because I think about what we were thinking in 2009 around assistive technology is very, very different than what we think about now. So a similar, checklist. This one might be outdated because we're again, this is actually created in 2001. This list, so I would imagine that that's probably pretty outdated. One of the, again, an area that I use frequently with families is often people think that students are ready to go on to post-secondary education, and so, and employment. And so these pages have some very specific information and questions around, okay, so if this person is ready to go on to employment, have their interests and abilities been assessed? Have they had any volunteer or paid work experiences? Just very basic information like that. And this can lead us to thinking about, okay, perhaps this person might need a little bit more experience in the area of post-secondary education before actually graduating, receiving a diploma, and moving on out of school district services. And then another section that I use frequently is, are you ready for college? This is probably the section that I use the most because, again, people believe that a student may be ready for college. And when we start asking these questions, many times families very quickly realize that the student may not have the skills that they need to enter into a traditional college or university setting. So important questions to ask, and like I said, outdated, but still some very good information in this document. And as soon as the new document becomes available, CPAC will put that information out on Facebook. We will put it in our newsletter. We want families to know that it's available and that it's ready to be used. And then last but not least, stepping forward. a self-advocacy guide for middle and high school students. So stepping forward was a document that was created, again, many years ago, and CPAC received some funding back in 2014. The original document was an educational journey from self-discovery to advocacy. And in 2014, we received some funding around self-advocacy for students. And so we were able to take this document and do an update, do a revision in 2014, and we did an update in 2016. I currently have this on my to-do list for another update because, you know, information changes, the names of agencies change, web links change, and this is an interactive document. So this document was created for students first, and families and school districts second. So it's really meant to work with the student, to go through the exercises with the student and help them understand and learn information that they will need to be successful as they transition to adult life. And so I'm just, again, I'm going to scroll through some of this beginning part quickly. We have the core transition skills in this document. And then it's broken down into 4 sections. And so I've seen school districts that use this in the 4 semesters of a student's school year to go through. I've seen school districts use this junior and senior year and go through it a couple of times, which is interesting because we know that most people learn best by repetition. I've seen school districts that really focus on one chapter per school year and really dig deep into these chapters and pull other information in that's not available in this document. And then I have seen families use it. I used it myself with my son many times as he was exiting school and preparing for transition. And so there's just a bunch of information in here that helps a student understand. And the reason why we really encourage families or teachers or professionals to work with the students is we recognize that there is a lot of text. We are hoping that with the update, it will be in a format that is, again, easier for a screen reader. This is okay when we put it through the screen reader, but things like boxes like this don't work very well. So that is one piece that we are hoping for. And also translation into Spanish is a definite for this document. It is not yet translated. So again, I'm just going to scroll through quickly. There are some wonderful sections here. And in the core transition skills, I said that I would refer to a document that has information in it that can support those transition skills. And this is the document. And so the State Department even has this document listed when you break down the core transition skills on what kinds of things can you do to support a student in learning those skills. And so this is listed actually in several places. So we have information and then we have activities. Sometimes it's going online. Sometimes it's, you know, interviewing a professional. This particular one is looking at learning styles. So if, you know, this information in this section is available not only just for students, but most of it is available for anyone. So if you don't know your learning style, it can be really interesting to find out how you learn best, or how many different ways you learn best. So that, and this is really important for students to know as they transition out into the world, what formats they need information in so that they can understand it best. Learning more about their disability is, you know, another one of those areas. If you know, we have seniors in high school that don't actually know what their disability is. They say things like, well, I know I'm different, but I don't know exactly what my disability is. And so I think that is a little too late. I know that parents try to protect their children sometimes by, you know, not letting them know what the diagnosis is. But at this point, for a person who is transitioning on to employment, independent living, university or college, or any post-secondary learning environment, they really need to know, because they need to know what their strengths are. They need to know what their challenges are. And that's the only way we can figure out what things support us. You know, as a person that has a diagnosed disability or not, you know, there are certain things that we are good at, and there are certain things that we are not good at. But when a person has a disability, it's important for them to know how their disability impacts them. Okay, so I will step off my soapbox about that. And then understanding their rights and responsibilities under disability law. So I referenced this section as well when we were looking at the core transition skills. And so looking again at the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 504 of the Rehab Act, IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So lots of information for them in this section, and a comparison chart. And then learning to self-advocate. So what do they need to know? What accommodations do they need? What's their style of communication? Have they had opportunities to practice these skills over and over and over again? Have they had the opportunity to practice these skills with people other than school staff and family members, people that they don't know? You know, do they know what their barriers are around self-advocacy, and how do you work around those barriers? And disclosure, disability disclosure is a big topic. Creating a self-advocacy plan, requesting accommodations. This is accommodations that are frequently used. I will take a look at this again before we do the update, because I bet it's a little bit, it was originally from 2013. I bet it's a little bit outdated. How to disclose, when to disclose. And then the other section that I wanted to point out, again, lots of good information in here, but the last thing I want to point out in building, stepping forward, is working on developing the IEP, developing transition goals. Information about that. Sorry, I'm scrolling through so quickly. Talking about job shadowing, independent living, making the transition. I want to get to the PPT section. So here we are. So participating in the PPT meetings and all the things that students need to take an active role in their PPT meeting, understanding their rights and responsibilities as a member of the PPT. They're the most important member of the PPT. Do they know that? So this is a sample transition PPT agenda, and I've gotten a lot of feedback from people that have used this and really like it. So again, not all of this is appropriate for every student, but if a student is learning how to run their own PPT meeting, perhaps they can create the agenda. And so this is a sample, this is a suggestion. Or can students take some of this? Can they take one part of it? You know, what's appropriate for that student? Why is this important? So there's, you know, lots of information there about why it's important. And then determining how to be involved, self-advocacy worksheet, and general information on having a successful PPT meeting. So that is all that I have. Let me shrink this one. There we go. So that is all that I have prepared for those 4 documents. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them in the chat box or in the Q&A section. And if you're watching on Facebook, then put them in the comments section. And while you're doing that, I'll just note that for more information, please check out our website, the transition section of our website. We have a lot of information there. The website is new as of a couple of months ago now. So we're really, really excited about it, and it looks really wonderful. So please go check it out. The National Technical Assistance Center on Transition has a lot of fantastic information around transition, as does Transition Coalition and PACER. This is the link to the State Department of Education new transition section. So if you haven't had a chance to check that out, it contains a lot of wonderful information, and that's where you can find these documents, as well as on the CPAC website. And then Connecticut also has a community of practice at cttransition.org. So you can find information for families, you can find information for students, and as well as professionals on that website. And then let's just check and see. Okay, so we have a question. The docs look very comprehensive. Oh, the documents look very comprehensive. However, my child has problems with motivation and is resistant to help from mom and dad. I can't imagine her willingly working through these. How have you seen schools or private counselors? Have I seen schools or private counselors help with going through these materials? Absolutely. I've absolutely seen schools, especially using building a bridge and stepping forward. Because yeah, it's not uncommon for students to be resistant to working with their parents, because we're mom and dad, and what do we know? And they don't want us telling them what to do. I might know that from some personal experience with my son. And so definitely using your resources. So asking a teacher or a counselor or transition professional at the school, or a private counselor to work with these documents is absolutely appropriate. They are available to everyone. They're not something that like some of the most evaluations must be done by somebody who's trained to do those evaluations. Nothing in these documents preclude you from using them, preclude anybody from using them. So definitely, please, share them with the professionals that work with your son or daughter, so that perhaps they can have some success where it might be more of a challenge with the family. So let me just check and see if any other questions. Okay. Just checking if you have any Facebook questions, and it doesn't look like we do. Okay, so unless any other questions pop up as I'm sharing this information, I thank you all for participating in the webinar this evening. It will be recorded, and it has been recorded, and it will show up on our Facebook page in a few minutes. And then it will also be on our website under online learning opportunities. If you haven't seen the first and second part in the series, the first one was transition in the law, and the second one was transition in the IEP. If you haven't seen them, they are also on CPAC's website under online learning opportunities. And I see another question pop up. Comments. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you both. And I just wanted to mention that we have 2 more webinars in the series. Part 4 is January 14th. It's transition to work. And then part 5 is February 11th, and it's transition to college. If you go to the events section of the CPAC website, which is www.cpacinc.org. So you go to the events section, and the signups will be available within the next couple of days. We will add the new sign up for part 4 to the website. So once again, thank you. Please, I'll send this link out to everyone as well, but please go to the link and do our evaluation. We have to report to the federal government that the information that we are providing to families and students, families and professionals is good information and high quality, and that it was helpful. So if you could help us out by doing that, I would greatly appreciate it. So once again, thank you, and have a wonderful rest of the evening. And I hope to see you all in January on the next webinar. Thanks, everybody.